the Chinese don't have the F-35, but the Chinese certainly would have Su-57E technology. How do we solve that?
And in some ways, we should also learn from the Chinese. They have been, absolutely shameless in shifting their allegiances and making the most of it. Today's and tomorrow's geopolitics will be around critical and emerging tech. As we have managed Russians, we will also manage the Americans. This is our leverage, right? When he says, I'm dangling F-35, we are also dangling huge budget that we have compared to many other countries.
Yes.
India is such a big buyer in the defense market.
Earlier you had peace summits and there were no Russians, and now you have peace summits or meetings in which there are no Ukrainians.
Now if you want us as a bulwark against China, you better shut up.
Trump is the reason why the Israelis are surprised, and even the Hamas is surprised.
But I do think what he has done is inject a sense of pragmatism in the space that, look, if you don't change, if this continues, then you might end up into a situation where someone like me will come. There are costs of not acting, because if you don't act, then if one day America decides to act, then you'll be at a loss.
He's like, in many ways, he's like Muhammad Ali, I'm the greatest. China firmly believes, and so does half the world, that Quad is an anti-China alliance. What do you think Trump's policy is going to be against China?
You have a Secretary of State, that has been sanctioned by Chinese. So there's a Rubio problem that China is facing. He has said, I have had a great conversation with Xi Jinping. We are going to solve global problems.
I want a geopolitical answer to a geopolitical question. Hello friends, welcome to Gap, the Gaurav Arya Podcast. A lot is being said about President Donald Trump. He took his oath on 20th of January, and since then the world has not been the same. Today I have with me a very special guest. I have Professor Harsh V Pant, who's Vice President, Observer Research Foundation, and a very respected voice as far as geopolitics goes. People love to listen to him. People read what he writes, and it's our honor and privilege to host him at our studios. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you for having me.
What's with Trump? A lot of people have tried to decipher the man, tried to understand. Friends are no longer friends and enemies are no longer enemies. So here is a person who comes and suddenly on the 21st of January, he takes oath on 20th. From 21st, the world is not the same. Suddenly he's cozying up to China. And please correct me if I'm wrong. He's sending out positive signals to Russia. And suddenly, Canada is not okay. And Denmark is not okay. And the allies of America for the past 70, 80 years are no longer okay. What's happening? Let's start from there and then we'll take it forward.
Gaurav, I think it's probably foolhardy to try to understand Mr. Trump, because I don't think we can do justice to our own intellectual faculties as well as to what he's doing by going down that route. I think largely with Mr. Trump, you take the day one at a time. That seems to me to be the logical conclusion of where he's coming from. But a lot of this disturbance, a lot of this volatility should not be surprising given his track record in the first term. It was a very interesting Trump 1.0. We know what he did or did not do in his first term and how turbulent that was. In fact, even his defeat was very turbulent in the US because he did not concede defeat formally. So it led to a whole set of events, and perhaps his coming back is also a tribute to the way he managed his election loss in the first term. But I think largely he revels in disruption. He feels that his base wants disruption. He feels that he comes as an outsider to the system, and system has not been very kind to him. So he wants to change the way American domestic and foreign policy operates, and he has his own ideas. Now, a lot of the things that, as you pointed out, from day one, he hit the ground running. So many EOs were signed, so many executive orders came into place. It's not entirely clear whether most of his signing signatures would survive, because a lot of them will end up in the legal process. A lot of them he himself has taken back. He says something one day and then he goes back a bit the other day. But I think broadly he will continue to disrupt the system. So I think as stakeholders in American foreign policy, as stakeholders in the global order in which America plays such a big role. We should be prepared for disruption, and I think we should continue to engage him on the basis that disruption would be his key hallmark. Now, as you rightly point out, we don't know who the allies are at the moment. It doesn't look as if Europe is reeling particularly, but even the others allies are not faring very well. Canada, of course, is seemingly a 51st state of Mr. Trump, reimagining America and its territorial expansion. I mean, imagine America in 21st century talking about territorial expansion. Till the other day, from Biden administration, we used to hear, look, Putin is expanding in Ukraine, and this is so 20th century, this is so 19th century. Now here is Mr. Trump talking about territorial expansion of America, and talking about Greenland there, Panama there. He has renamed Gulf of Mexico, and doing all kinds of things which perhaps the world will at this point, we are not being able to decipher why he's doing a lot of that, and perhaps a lot of them won't survive for a long time. But I think in the process, he's making us alive to the fact that geopolitics, continues to be the operating principle of the global order, that you really cannot take things for granted, that almost all the assumptions that you had made as to how the world will work, those assumptions have fallen by the wayside. And, ever so often you will end up having a leader anywhere in parts of the world which will be so disruptive that, you will be scrambling for a response, as at the moment at least the Europeans are doing, but I'm sure it will come to others as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Harsh. I'm going to take you geography by geography. Now, I think Trump is the reason why the Israelis are surprised. And even the Hamas is surprised. And I'll tell you why. Because one day he says, I want to do a project, a seaside project in Gaza. Now, we were all discussing very serious issues like, would a two-state solution work, and should there be some sort of a corridor in between, which will be manned by the United Nations? And people said that there should be elections in Gaza, and we were discussing things like that. And suddenly Trump comes and he says everybody leaves. He wants, I think, a Trump Tower in Gaza. I don't know what he wants, but Netanyahu looked a little bit surprised, though he managed a smile, a small little smile. He was surprised. Hamas and the Iranians were absolutely flabbergasted because he's talking about something else. Now, what do you think is his play in Israel? And also, I would like you to connect it to the Abraham Accords. What is he doing? Why is he doing? And, what's his end game?
See, I think he was, I think people don't give him credit in his first term, Abraham Accords. That was quite a revolutionary thing to do, to ask the Arab states to link up with, to normalize their relations with Israel was something that would have fundamentally altered the nature of the game in the Middle East. So in some ways, he has this sense perhaps that business and deals would solve even in the most serious of political problems. That if you can just make a deal, if you can just give people a sense that Gaza is going to be this booming with real estate once Trump enters, or once real estate magnates enter Gaza, suddenly there'll be a new political calculation everyone would be making. I don't think, that's likely to happen. In any case, that's not likely to survive given the political realities on the ground. And we know that. We know the history. We know how people don't always, fight for, food on their table or for economic reasons. There are strong ideological reasons why people struggle and people fight, and people are dying. People have died. So I don't think people are going to forget that, because Mr. Trump wants to build Gaza as a resort area, things are going to change. But I do think what he has done is inject a sense of pragmatism in the space that, look, if you don't change, if this continues, then you might end up into a situation where someone like me will come maybe today or tomorrow and that person will have very different ideas about how they want to manage. So America, that for a long time, both Israelis and the Palestinians were relying on fundamentally to broker a peace. I mean, let's be honest. Only Americans have the power to ensure that some kind of a resolution happens in that space. It is another matter that when sometimes Americans are interested, sometimes they are not. But only they have the capability and the heft to push it. Now, if Americans, and you are hearing from Washington that, look, I'm not interested, all of you get out, I'm going to create a resort here, that shakes people up. That, then you realize the real cost of not acting, of not deciding at the right point. That, look, you have had enormous opportunities in the past to come to a negotiating table, to settle this dispute. Maybe America was also at fault at times, but don't take it for granted that you will always be getting this support from the US. And I think that's what, in some ways, he has shaken, the rules of the game in the place. And that, both for Israelis and for Palestinians, I think this is a wake-up call, because he's also talking about a lot of other things. This is, of course, in the context of Israel-Palestine, but he's also, if you see India-US joint statement, there is this talk of the India-Israel Arab Middle East corridor.
Yes,
now,
IMEC.
Which is, he doesn't mention IMEC.
Yes.
But it's IMEC-like.
Yes.
Now, that means that he's interested in connecting, a lot of these geographies together so that geoeconomics starts driving the process. I think what in the process he's not realizing is that geopolitically that region is so problematic, is that we talked of IMEC in the G20 summit, we announced it, and then suddenly you had the, October crisis in 2023, Hamas attack on Israel, and everything was put on the side. So I think in that sense, perhaps he's right that, look, there are costs of not acting, because if you don't act, then if one day America decides to act, then you'll be at a loss. Maybe that will shake things up. I'm not so sure, but I think that's the intent. That seems to be the logic behind some of that move that he has made. But Middle East being Middle East, I think most Americans are also fed up, because we are talking in the context where there is a pushback, and the whole rise of Trump is predicated on this belief that America should not be engaged in foreign wars, that America should be focusing more inwards. And I think that is where he's also coming from. He doesn't want to talk about conflict. He doesn't want to talk about wars, because that means that America will be engaged. So he's trying to consolidate his energies back home, and giving a sense to his base in the US. That, look, I'm not interested in making wars. I'm not going there in a very conflict-ridden region. In fact, I'm going to transform that conflict into an economic proposition, into a real estate proposition, perhaps in the case of Gaza. So I think he's responding to his base, but he's also responding and shaking things up in the process for the stakeholders in the Middle East.
Did I read this right? I don't even remember it, but I think Jordan is suddenly saying that, okay, we'll take some Palestinians. I think he's been pressurizing both Egypt and Jordan to do that. And one of them has buckled, is it?
They have not buckled in the sense that they have not really accepted all the claims that he's making. But I think, look, behind the scenes, all of them would be working with him at the moment, just like all the other countries, because every country is out there now to fend for itself. So if you can negotiate with him, if you can tell him that, look, maybe not the numbers that you are asking us, but a fraction of those numbers I'm going to take, I think that's good enough for him in terms of deal making. He'll say, look, no one else was able to do this, but I got it done just by the threat of making Gaza a resort town.
Yes. He's like, in many ways, he's like Muhammad Ali, I'm the greatest.
The greatest, yes.
Yeah, he does that. Okay. Now, coming back to my favorite topic of Greenland, which you touched upon, but yes, he has mentioned Greenland before, even in Trump 1.0. He's mentioned Greenland, but, military intervention in Greenland, he said that's this time, and he said so many other things. So two things on the face of it troubled Trump. One, the movement of the Chinese and the Russians very close to American waters, or even if not American waters, international waters, which he thinks is a danger. And number two, the fact that Greenland is rich in mineral wealth. We can agree that maybe, he's not going to send Marine battalions. But then Maybe nobody knows. But let's assume that he will not send Marine battalions. What is his hook in Greenland? Why does he actually want Greenland? For what?
See, I think what he has done is he has raised an issue that was so peripheral in American foreign policy. No one used to talk about Greenland in America. He has made it centerpiece of, imagine an American president in his first few days talking about 3 or 4 things, and one of them is Greenland. I mean, even the Danes would have been, I mean, they were surprised, but of course they've been shaken up by what he has done. But what I think largely it seems that this is about how the region is responding, perhaps that geography is responding to external players. And in this particular case, the role that Russians and the Chinese have started playing, the whole Arctic game that is being played out, he, in his own way, is responding to that challenge that America faces. That look, there is a problem here that Americans are not engaged in the way that they should be. There is a problem here that, Russians and the Chinese are involved. And there is a problem that perhaps, as an ally, we are not being treated fairly. That, why is it that Denmark is so supportive of the Russians and the Chinese endeavors there? Or not supportive, but allowing that to happen. Whereas we need to get some, good minerals out of Greenland, which we are not getting. So how is this an equal partnership? I think one of the things that he's particularly he believes, and he's particularly peeved about, is that, look, America has been shortchanged, that America is, has been treated unfairly.
Which is what a lot of Americans also believe.
Yes. I mean, that is why he came to power. He has come to power.
Yes.
But it is very interesting because that in some ways, he has, turned the argument upside down, because for a large part of the world, you hear Americans have treated them unfairly.
Yes.
So he is now saying, no, America has been treated unfairly. So he sort of talks about in Europe, in Greenland, to the Canadians, to Mexicans, even to Indians, that everywhere. This was a complete inversion of the argument that you used to hear. America is the problem. You go in large parts of the world, you hear this, right? America is this big, deep state that is creating all sorts of troubles everywhere. And now suddenly this has been inverted. He's saying, no, I'm the victim here. And America is, it's remarkable if you think about it.
Yes.
It's audacious because that changes the nature of conversation. Now you sit with him, you say, my God, how am I going to tell you that, I am the victim? Because people used to go and complain to Americans, look, you are treating us so unfairly. This is not fair. You are the hegemon. Now he's saying, no, you are the problem. You are taking me for granted. You have shortchanged me. Therefore, you give me a better deal. So he's starting from a very interesting point now. So in some ways...
and he's got the numbers to prove it.
Exactly.
So he'll say tariff.
In some cases, yes. He has the numbers. But I think in the case of India, our trade deficit is it's in our favor. So he can't... it's in America's favor. So he can't really talk about that with us. But in some, with some countries he does. Our tariffs are very high, which is fair.
Yes.
As far as Americans are concerned, and he can raise that issue, and tell, look, your tariffs. He keeps reminding us, but that's what is so interesting about the man. If you remove all your anxiety about him, if you just look at him as a character, you realize
he's a funny guy.
It's a funny, but at times you also underestimate him. That look, he's, we all have this, he's making all sorts of random remarks. But if you put them all together, you get a very cohesive argument that America, America has been betrayed by the large part of the world. So I'm here to change that. And therefore I'm going to negotiate from a position of strength rather than from a position of weakness, which every American president used to think, acha, now I have to negotiate with you. First you tell me all your grievances about America. Now he starts with his grievances.
So you don't have any.
I have. So I don't think that in this case of Greenland also that has happened. That look, he's saying if Denmark is a partner of the US, then Denmark should be treating us fairly. And Greenland is a place where I can, which is something I can leverage, and I think he's leveraging Greenland to that effect. Whatever happens. I think one interesting thing, Greenland is going to have elections. And there used to be a very small pro-independence,
Inside
Greenland.
Okay.
But that might get amplified because of this, because they might feel more emboldened now that Mr. Trump is talking about Greenland.
I won't put it beyond the CIA to fund that party and say that, here is $500 million and go fly with this.
Yes. I mean, again, Mr. Trump believes that a lot of American agencies have been used to create trouble elsewhere, so he's not going to do it. But when it comes to Greenland, maybe he'll do it.
Maybe he'll do it. Huh? Okay. Now, I want to take you to China. China is hit back with tariffs of its own. 40, 50 years back, the Chinese economy did not look like it looks now. China was a third world country. China was down in the dumps. China had its own set of problems. And then, of course, the Americans came, the Europeans came. There was massive transfer of technology, manufacturing, low labor costs, and China built up an ecosystem over a period of time. Now, that money is being used to a very large extent to sort of upgrade its Navy, Air Force, the entire PLA structure. I want you to tell our audience about how you think Trump is going to tackle. Trump understands that China is a problem. He might not say it, he has said it, but not as aggressively as he would in case of Canada or Denmark, but he understands that China is a threat. Now, this with the upcoming Quad Summit in India, which is going to happen, I think, September, October sometime. The Quad Summit will happen in India. India will host the Quad Summit. And whether we want to admit or not, but China firmly believes, and so does half the world, that Quad is an anti-China alliance. We may not say it, China believes so. With that as a backdrop, what do you think Trump's policy is going to be against China vis-a-vis the Quad?
I think, Gaurav, that is the most important issue at this point for us and for a large part of the world, because Trump, as you were pointing out, has given mixed signals so far in his second term. But I want to take you to the first term. Look, when he came, Trump 1.0, you remember the entire campaign. A lot of it was about China. A lot of it was about how China was shortchanging the Americans and why he would, go and mobilize the world and mobilize American resources against China. At that point in time, everyone thought that, this is just rhetoric. Everyone thought that there is such a solid consensus around America's China policy of continuity and managing China, including not simply in Washington, but also in Brussels, in Europe, that things may not change very much.
Jay.
But he single-handedly changed the discourse and the policies on China. So you saw in Trump 1.0 how the needle started shifting away from China. All the discussion about China as a challenger, all the discourse on China as a technology challenger, economic challenger, decoupling, the whole discourse on decoupling started. And it was not simply US that responded. The larger West responded. So you had the European context changed. So I think, there are times when you have leaders who can position, discourses in ways that allow for the change to happen. And Trump, I think in Trump 1.0 managed to come to that sort of an understanding, which is, I think, quite remarkable for to change the entire setup in US, to change the entire consensus, to break that consensus was not only brave, but also the results were quite remarkable because the shift has been quite dramatic. In Trump 2.0, we know that, again, he came to office and the campaign was very aggressive on China. We also know that some of his appointees are, Marco Rubio has been sanctioned by China. So,
yes.
You have a Secretary of State, that has been sanctioned by Chinese. So there's a Rubio problem that China is facing. And we heard Rubio's testimony at the confirmation hearings, very aggressive on China, explicitly articulating that if we don't do something about China, China will just make it impossible for us to even live. So these are very strong words that are coming from perhaps the second most important person in the administration,
yes.
If you remove Musk from it. I mean, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State.
Yes.
But in that sense, there is a continuity here. There is an argument here that you can make. But in terms of his approach so far, he has been more subtle. He has not really attacked the way he used to attack China publicly. He announced, he said 100% tariffs, 200% tariffs. Then he came 10% tariffs. He has said, I have had a great conversation with Xi Jinping. We are going to solve global problems. There is an element of toning down some of the rhetoric about China, which you observe. But on the other hand, you also see that the day after inauguration, the Quad summit happened. The former foreign ministers meeting happened. The first thing, big official engagement was the Quad. We also know that very interestingly, the U.S. State Department has removed some words from their online section, fact sheet on Taiwan, where they have removed the fact that America will not support Taiwanese independence. So that has been removed. Now that has taken that has blindsided the Chinese. Chinese are saying, what is it? Does this mean that Americans will now come out, militarily in support of Taiwanese if a conflict happens? Because it opens up that debate about America's role. That consensus on Taiwan that used to be that no one should disrupt status quo unilaterally. Suddenly you find that reference has been removed about Taiwanese independence, and America will not support that from the fact sheet. So he's doing so many things at the same time. So many balls are in the air that I think it's very difficult to discern a pattern at this stage, both for, I think, America's partners as well as for China. But one thing that is happening in practice, which is that Rubio, for example, has reinforced the security relationship with Philippines, with Japan, with South Korea, which are the treaty alliance partners of the US. We have had Modi going Prime Minister Modi going to Washington.
Yes.
So therefore, the US-India equation has been settled, and we have talked about the Indo-Pacific Quad has been settled. So in practice, we are seeing the ground being laid out. But I think in rhetoric, what you are witnessing is perhaps still a desire to see whether these initial salvos can give you some traction at the negotiating table with the Chinese. And that will be the critical test. If the Americans, at some point, the Chinese say, all right, we are willing to negotiate, then what kind of the terms of reference of those negotiations, what kind of terms of reference will we see coming out of that? Because that will impact everyone. That will impact us. That will impact America's other treaty partners in the region. And of course, the logic of the Indo-Pacific and how it goes forward.
One thing, Harsh, that has been troubling India for a very long time is the proximity of the Russians and the Chinese, So, because we've been dependent for weapons on the Russians for a very, very long time, and more than 65% of our weapons across Army, Navy and Air Force are of Russian origin. Some of them of Soviet origin also. The point I'm trying to make here is that, or ask you, is will Trump also move in certain ways? Because he hasn't said anything harsh against Russia, not that I've read. And he seems to be neutral. He wants to finish off this conflict. And he's also said that in his earlier remarks, he said that the territories that the Russians have captured should be with the Russians and stuff like that, which of course Zelensky did not like. The question I'm asking you is, how does it help the Indians? The audience would like to know, how does it help the Indians if you delink China and Russia? Which means, so let us assume there is peace in Ukraine and Russia. That is one part. Then there is peace in the Middle East. Will that allow the Americans and the larger West to focus specifically on the Chinese? Do you think that could be one strategy?
Yes, and I think, perhaps we are reading too much. Maybe we are reading too much, but I think if you take away this idea of madman theory, there are various elements where there seems to be a method to Mr. Trump's madness. Now, if you are sitting here from India, some of these things, this whole rapprochement with Russia is great for us, right? If our fundamental problem since the Ukraine war has been that America and Russia have been at loggerheads, which basically puts us in a very difficult position because we want both. We really can't afford, and we want both primarily to manage China, which is a very interesting thing, right? As you said, 65% of our weapons are coming from Russia. And if you have a situation with the Chinese, you need Russians on your side. So the first visit that Raksha Mantri makes is to Russia after Galwan crisis. Because what if the Russians stop providing you weapons? What will you do on the battlefield at an operational level?
Yes.
At the strategic level, you need the Americans, because they are in some ways managing the globe. You need them for intelligence. You need them for all kinds of operational details that perhaps would be needed when you're fighting with the Chinese, and the critical weaponry, the critical technology that should continue to come to us from the West, that can only come through the American support. So you need both of them, Americans in the Indo-Pacific, Russians for the operational tactical reasons, and the fact that both of them were at loggerheads put so much pressure on Indian diplomacy. Indian diplomacy managed to do very well despite that. That's a tribute to our diplomacy, but that doesn't mean that the pressure was not on us.
Yes.
And it still is on us, whether on oil, on defense, on having a relationship with Russia. It was very difficult. So it has been a very difficult period. Now, if there is a rapprochement between US and Russia, of course, this pressure goes away. So you are free, you have greater space to maneuver. You can do things with both sides to keep your capabilities intact and expand them. On top of that, if this whole sense of Russia and the Chinese breaking up becomes a reality, and that will only become a reality if, as India has repeatedly said, if America and the West make a move. And in this case, Trump seems to be making that move. Now, whether he's making that move in a sort of a reverse of what Nixon did, right? He broke China away from Soviet Union.
Yes.
If that is the kind of game that he has in mind here, I'm not so sure. But if he can do that, that would again be remarkable for us, because our basic problem and challenge, I think, would have been and will continue to be, if Russians and the Chinese continue to build their relationship the way they have been building. And that, I think, if really they enter into an alliance framework, into a security alliance framework, which the Russians were always saying that, because we are out of the Western, sphere, we want to engage the Chinese. And Indians were always trying to make sure that they do not end up as close to the Chinese as possible. But it was not in India's hands. It is largely in the Western hands, right, to make that maneuver. So if Trump makes that maneuver and it succeeds, it would be great for India. It would allow India much greater space, and it would allow India to put in greater counterweight in managing China. But I think that will, that is something that we, analytically we can think about at this point. But operationally, whether Mr. Trump is able to deliver that remains to be seen. What conditions he will impose on Russia to ensure that Putin concludes this war, that is still very much in the air. Europeans are very annoyed that all the cards have been given to the Russians, that there are seemingly no cards that he's using. He's putting all the pressure on Zelensky to conclude the war. He's not putting any pressure, any conditionalities on Putin at this point. Now, we don't know, how the deal is being played out. But I think one of the, I think Rubio made that statement after his meeting with Lavrov, that we do see US and Russia working together for global geopolitical reasons. Whatever that means, if it means that the larger geopolitics is shifting, US-Russia rapprochement leads a greater marginalization of China from this space, that's good for India. And I think India would be hoping for that. But I don't think India should hope too much and continue to prepare what we are doing on the basis of the realities on the ground.
No, absolutely. That photograph was very, very interesting, because you have Rubio here and you have Lavrov here and you have these Arabs there, the NSA or the minister there, and there is no Ukrainian in that photograph. And if you turn back the calendar a little bit, there's this huge 90-country summit which was held in Switzerland, in which they said that, peace, and there were no Russians there. Now, with Trump coming up or coming into power, what has happened is that the entire thing has now turned. Earlier, you had peace summits and there were no Russians, and now you have peace summits or meetings in which there are no Ukrainians. And Zelensky suddenly threw a fit and he said that, this is not acceptable. And, well, that is just how it happens. Now, I'm going to now take you back to India. We've been to Europe. We have traveled through America, China, Russia, much of Asia. Time to come back to India. So Trump is very keen to sell weapons to India. And we have had this podcast with various senior military officers about weapon platforms. And that is not my question. My question is that generally, when we tend to compare weapons, should we take the F-35? Should it be the Su-57E? We're comparing cost, value propositions. What can this platform do? What can this platform do? What is the entire life cycle management cost? And stuff like that, how far can it fly? What is the radius? What hard points does it carry? That aside, let us say that India buckles, because we are having trials of Striker and Javelin and stuff like that. And we already have American equipment. I mean, we have the Chinook and we have the Apache helicopters and we have so much more. I mean, the drones are coming in. First part of the question is, why are Americans pushing for fighter aircraft? F-35 is a carrot that he has dangled, that maybe we will speak about that. Maybe. But maybe you should buy, he did not say that, but I'm saying that maybe, you should buy the Hornet, or you should buy the F-15 Eagle, or you should buy some stuff like that. That is the first question. And secondly, how will it change our entire outlook if we suddenly, because buying a fighter jet is a big deal. It's unlike buying a Javelin or unlike buying a Striker. This is a big ticket item, maybe 10, 20, 30 billion dollars, right? How will it change our relationship with the United States? Because I'm looking at weapons geopolitically and not simply as weapon platforms. I'm not doing that. I want a geopolitical answer to a geopolitical question.
See, I think most weapon sales are fundamentally geopolitical, big ticket sales are geopolitical in nature. Because geostrategic in nature, because you are not simply entering into a buyer-seller relationship. You are entering into a long-term engagement with a country with whom you hope to have long-term good relations in the future, right? Especially if you have big platforms, then one of the problems that you face, or one of the challenges that you face now with Russia model is that we have bought so much from Russia, which means that even when there are challenges, you really cannot suddenly reduce your engagement with Russia, right? That you will have to continue to maintain a line of communication with the Russians because of the kind of legacy issues that come with over 60 years of buying weapons from Russia, 70 years now of buying weapons from Russia. So that is the long-term engagement that comes with buying big ticket items that creates the dependencies it creates, the vulnerabilities it creates, the challenges it creates. I think that is very important when you are thinking of weapons acquisition. And one of the criticisms of our Indian defense policy has always been that we buy off the shelf. There is no strategic thinking behind why we are buying, from whom we are buying. Perhaps we could have done better in that.
And piecemeal.
वो तो उसमें the challenges that come with that approach is that when you end up in this situation, like you ended up with, say, for example, Ukraine crisis suddenly happened and there was so much pressure on Russia, and then you had to diplomatically double down on it, to ensure that your lines of communication with Russia were open and that you were able to tell the Americans and the West that, look, it is because of you that we ended up in this situation. Right? You did not sell us high-end weaponry during Cold War. Therefore, our dependency on Russia continued, and therefore we are in this situation. Now, if you want us as a bulwark against China, you better shut up. Right? That is basically the message we gave them, and they understood it. Now, therefore, geopolitically, it becomes a challenge that if you're buying fighter jets from the US, do you anticipate a relatively stable relationship with them? See, it's always very difficult in India because even if for example you were asking this question in 1990s, no one would have said yes, right? Given the historical memory of Cold War,
yes.
No one would have
1971
exactly. You would not be betting on the Americans.
Yes, and
even today there is so much criticism of the Americans in the system.
May I just interrupt and say something very interesting point that you're making here? Whenever I talk to a lot of military veterans, it's not that they're saying that we want Russian equipment only. It's not that. There is this sense that I get from them that you can't trust the Americans. I don't know where that came from because I don't have that kind of experience. But without exception, all of them that I've spoken to, yes, you must engage with the Americans. Yes, we must have a deeper relationship with the Americans. But there is always that underlying thought, can you trust the Americans?
Yes, and it's not simply the veterans. It's the bureaucracy, even the foreign policy bureaucracy. You get that sense of a certain generation in particular that, look, this can be a double-edged sword. Now, I think there are two ways to look at it. One is, of course, your pragmatic considerations. If you need good weapons at this point in time, you need good weapons. I mean, you really can't be thinking of 25 years down the line.
Yes.
If there is a convergence of interests, which is, which favors the moment, then make the most of it. I think, and in some ways, we should also learn from the Chinese. They have been, absolutely shameless in shifting their allegiances and making the most of it. We were talking about 1970s and how Kissinger shift happened, Nixon shift happened.
Correct.
They moved seamlessly from the Soviet camp to the American camp, and then they really start challenging the Americans by the 1990s. They used Americans to their advantage. Why? I mean, we should also be thinking of, if Americans are dangling something in front of us, why should we not take it and make the most of it as of now, because we need it? Maybe build our capacities and then ensure that 10 years down the line, if you have to challenge the Americans, then so be it. But I think we also, in some ways, our bureaucratic historical memory, which is always important and which also, should shape our behavior. But at times we get too wrapped up around it, right? Ultimately, it's a question of technology which is changing very, very rapidly. You have to build your own capacity. You have your self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, which will take time to incubate, which will take time to deliver you results.
Decades.
Exactly. And that, if you have a government in place that continues to support that initiative. In India, you never know. Tomorrow, a different government may decide, no, this is not a priority. I mean, although logically it should be, but who knows?
Yeah.
So in that sense, you then need certain kind of critical technologies. Now, aren't we now doing working with Americans on critical and emerging tech?
Yes, we are.
So how different is that from defense tech? If you are saying that, look, critical and emerging technologies, we are going to collaborate, we are going to do all kinds of things. Look at the ISET used to be, now it is trust. They've changed the wording in the joint statement. Initiative on critical and emerging technologies is now trust. Now, that is today's and tomorrow's geopolitics will be around critical and emerging tech. Now, if you are willing to cooperate with them on that, I think defense tech we should also be more pragmatic in thinking about it. It's not as if that we should buy whatever Americans are selling us, but having an open mind about this is not a bad idea. Keeping the older historical memory always at the back of your mind perhaps may not serve us great dividends, because yes, of course there are challenges, but there are also going to be challenges with other partners. As we have managed Russians, we will also manage the Americans. It's not as if with the Russians it has been seamless.
It's not a binary.
Exactly. And with Russians also we have faced challenges.
Yes.
So many challenges. They have been very good to us, but they've also been very obtrusive at times.
Yes.
You recall the Admiral Gorshkov case?
Yes.
How it was overpriced and how the price continued.
It almost
to go
doubled
up.
and the timelines were
never delivered on time.
Yeah.
So, I think, and it's good to have options. Why to put all your eggs in one basket? It's always good to reduce that dependence on Russia. 65%. We have to come down. It has to come down. So I don't, in some ways, having if we are putting our faith on the US system for certain kinds of technologies, then I don't think defense technologies should be something that we should be worried overtly or more about. Yes, we should have our priorities clear, but what we need also is to use this opportunity to build our capacities at home, which is the most important thing. Unless we build those capacities at home, so we are ensuring technology transfer. We should ask for from buyer seller to co-production and co-development. That phase has to continue with all our partners, and we are trying to push that. So I think in that sense, with Trump in particular, right? We started this conversation from geopolitics. This is a leverage, right? When he says, I'm dangling F-35, we are also dangling huge budget that we have compared to many other countries.
Yes.
India is such a big buyer in the defense market.
Yes.
Still,
yes.
I mean, it's not a good thing, but we are.
You're top important. Yeah.
So we have to say, yes, we have money, we have resources, and we are willing to buy, but we will buy on our own terms. So I think, as a negotiating tactic, you start from there, and then you end up having a conversation as to what technology is best for you, what conditions are being imposed, because and I think that is where here something is important. Unlike the Israelis that often get a free hand in using American technology, what are the conditions that will be imposed on you? And therefore, can you use this moment to also ask for better deal? That look, yes, I'm willing to buy this technology from the US, but are you also going to give it to us on the same terms and conditions that you sell it to Israelis? Are we that kind of a partner for you?
Most likely not.
But given that he's telling you that we'll buy, we should also say, yes, we are willing to buy, but what are the terms here? So I think it does expand the scope of our diplomatic engagement. It does expand the scope of what terms we are willing to bring on the table, and we should make the most of it.
No. My last question to you, and this is not so much a question, but also an observation that, when the Russians say that we'll give you the Su-57E, they say, okay, we will shift everything to India. We'll give you the technology. With complete 100% transfer of technology, we'll make in India, etc., etc. Also, the platform is 50% lesser. Now, Trump never says or has never said in the past that, hey, done, we are giving you the F-35. He's not said that. What he's saying is that we will move towards that. So maybe sometime in the distant future, if you buy a lot of stuff, then you may get it. My observation here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that our squadron strength is falling. And I've had this conversation with so many former Air Force officers. It's supposed to be 42. And that figure of 42 is also, I don't know, decades old. It should be revised. It's very, very old. But then they say, what's the point of revising it if you've not reached 42? Now it's 31 odd, and it'll go down in a couple of years. What is the quick fix? Now, Atmanirbharta is 20, 30 years. It'll take time. It's not going to happen today. Do you recommend, as an analyst, as a voice that is respected, that immediately, because China has it, and where am I coming from? I'm coming from the position that because the Chinese and the Russians are so close, I'm assuming that whatever the Russians have, the Chinese also have it. And they've figured out a way to deal with that. The Chinese don't have the F-35, but the Chinese certainly would have Su-57E technology. How do we solve that? This is my last question.
See, I have been in the past also very explicit about it that look, for what has happened in the last few years, not for the want of India not doing anything, but India has engaged with Russia very, very productively. But the Russia-China axis is our biggest problem. Now, as you point out, in defense also we have seen a lot of collaboration. We are seeing a lot of working together. We are seeing a lot of technology sharing happening. Now, my own sense has always been that our major problem being China, we really should be moving fast with the Americans. Now, I don't, or with the West. And I think we have done that to an extent. Rafael and others from France have been expedited. Look at the expedition here. Even the expeditious approach is so slow, right? Now, I think we get caught up in the bureaucratic maze that we have created in defense procurement, which has not really helped us. And that means that we are always on the back foot, as you have been, the whole debate on squadrons, the whole debate on, how much is enough capabilities. That differential is growing by the day. So you need to be proactive in ensuring that the cutting edge technology and equipment wherever you are getting it, particularly from the West, because I think one thing that you understand now, that West and China will have a fundamental contradiction in their relationship. See, it was not so clear 10 years back. Especially in Europe, it was not so clear. But Europe, it's very clear now. That contradiction that has emerged in the last post-Trump 1.0, that contradiction is now internalized by the European, has been internalized. So you have to use this moment to your advantage, because this is a moment, many people have written about India's moment, etc. But I think this is a moment where the balance of power really favors you. And a large part of the world in the West looks at you as a partner. They may have their own problems. Europe, for example, we can all talk about how Europe is a decaying power, declining power, but they have niche assets that you need that can be very helpful to you. So you need to build that partnership at this particular point, and particularly with Europe, I would say,
yes,
because Europe, Americans seem to be abandoning Europe, and Europe is at a crossroads with regard to China. I think this is a moment when India can step in and say that, look, we will continue our partnership. Mr. Modi's visit to France, I think it was very masterly in that sense, that look, we are going to France, conveying a message, signing all these deals, conveying a message that we are there on track with our partnership, and then going to US and talking all about India, America. But I think giving the sense to Europe that you will continue to be a partner for irrespective of what America does to you or not. I think this is your moment to exploit those vulnerabilities. And ultimately in geopolitics, opportunities like this come very rarely. So when they come, you should make the most of them, and you should try to exploit them to your advantage. There's no point bemoaning later and complaining, oh, the world is unfair. The world is unfair,
It will always be.
It will always be. So just make the most of what you are getting at the right time, at the right moment. If you can have an impact, that will help you. So I personally feel that there are enough opportunities for India, but ultimately the problem lies with us, not with others. So if we can, one of the biggest things that you would have explored in many of your programs is our processes, our structures that constrain us, right?
Yes.
The challenge is not outside, the challenge is within. Yes. Unless we get it right, how do we get others see us differently?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Professor Harsh Pant, for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a lovely conversation on Trump, and then from Trump, it went to China. We traveled to Greenland. We saw half of Europe. We came back to India, and then so many other things, Russia, China, etc. It was education for me as well, because when you talk to these experts, you learn. And I hope you also learned after what Professor Harsh Pant mentioned about so many other topics that we spoke. And if you like this podcast, if you've liked this video, please press the like button, subscribe to our channel. And thank you very much for watching this video. And we're going to be back again next week with another expert. Till then, Jai Hind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.